It's the single biggest COVID-19 health measure that's still in place, our closed international borders. They're keeping us in, stranded Aussies and tourists out, and having a huge impact on the tourism industry. And we want it to stay that way. 79% of us agree that Australia should keep its international borders shut until the COVID-19 pandemic is under control globally. There's overwhelming agreement in all age groups and states, and we want the borders to stay shut. It's not like we think this pandemic will be under control anytime soon. We asked how long people expect before things get back to normal, and around 20% of us thought things would be more or less back to normal by early next year. Another fifth of us don't see things being back to normal until at least March 2023, while 8% say things will never be back to normal. With all the ways the world has changed in the past year, perhaps those 8% are right on the money.
Well, let's get more on this with Natasha Kassam, Director of the Lowy Institute's Public Opinion and Foreign Policy Program. Thank you so much for your time and for taking a closer look at these numbers with us. So 79% of respondents support the border staying shut until the pandemic is under control globally. And that's in keeping with other recent polls asking a similar question. What do you put it down to, that very high level of support?
Thanks so much for having me. Look, I do think there are a few things going on here. A lot of people are rightfully scared. You know, they've seen what's happened in other countries. They've seen the way this pandemic can ravage a society. And they're proud of the way Australia has managed under these circumstances. So I think in that context, it's not surprising that the vast majority of Australians are worried about opening up to the world. Having said that, when you dig into these numbers a little bit, I think you do uncover a few different opinions. Some people think that we should be able to open borders if everyone is vaccinated. So we don't know what that's going to look like. We don't know when everybody will be vaccinated. But we understand now, I think, that other countries are getting back to normal when they have those high vaccination rates. The other thing is that I think tough borders has always been good policy in Australia. It's always been quite popular with the public. And so we're playing into those trends while the world is quite scary, and Fortress Australia has always been a pretty popular sentiment.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that 81% of people with European ancestry support the border closure compared to 71% of those with non-European ancestry. Is that because non-white migrants to Australia want to be able to travel to see family overseas?
I think we've seen demographics in Australia change really significantly over the past few decades. 1 in 3 Australians was born elsewhere. There's a huge proportion of the country, as you say, that are linked to family overseas and want to be able to be there with them. So even though I think for a lot of people, the idea of closed borders might mean not going on holidays to Bali, or it might mean restrictions on business travel, I think there are other people where this really means separated families and missing out on really significant life events.
What are the risks of keeping the international border closed apart from the obvious economic costs?
Australia is a country that is, proud of its history of trade, being open to the world. The vast majority of Australians agree in most polls that immigration is good for our country. It makes us stronger. We pride ourselves on being a multicultural society. So the idea of being closed off from the world, I think, puts a lot of that national identity at risk. Of course, we want to be able to reopen safely. And so I do understand why so many Australians don't feel confident that we can do that. So that we really are in this kind of in-between phase where we're seeing a lot of the world get closer to normal. We're not quite there yet, but we want to hold on to the safety we've had, and there's risk associated with both sides of that.
Yeah, in 2019, when Australia Talks posed the question, sometimes people's freedoms need to be restricted to keep Australia safe, 54% of people agreed. That's now gone up to 70%, so an increase of 16 percentage points. What do you think that tells us about how Australians feel about the coronavirus pandemic and that they're willing to give up personal liberties in order to keep the community safe?
Australians have been able to make remarkable sacrifices to keep the community safe. And we see in poll after poll that the vast majority of people are proud of the way we've handled this. They're proud of the way the government have handled this, whether it's at the federal level, the state level, or even the community level. But they have been willing to take on a lot of these kind of changes where we haven't been able to go out, we haven't been able to leave the country. Some of these are standard, and most countries have had lockdowns of some nature. But others are different. You know, there aren't very many countries at all at this moment that won't let their citizens leave without a special exemption or permission from the government. So Australia really is in a unique place in that sense. Look, we don't have a Human Rights Act or a Bill of Rights of any nature. We haven't really had a public debate about what are the ramifications of having these kinds of restrictions on individuals' rights and freedoms. But in the end, Australia does look pretty good compared to the rest of the world. And so people aren't really asking those questions. They just want to stay safe.
Yeah, it's so interesting. The high vaccine uptake will be critical to reopening. And now we're hearing more details about a possible vaccine passport. The Prime Minister is expected to take that plan to National Cabinet next week. Do you think vaccine passports are a good idea?
Look, I can't really comment on the public health ramifications of that, but I do understand that people want to see a fast track to getting back to being overseas, reconnecting with family, and all of that. Certainly, when we asked some of these questions in the Lowy Institute poll in March, we found quite a lot of support for the idea of a vaccine passport. You know, we had about 1/5 of the country that said we should be able to leave now, regardless of the pandemic situation in the world. But we had 41% of Australians say that if we've been vaccinated, we should be able to leave as we see fit. So I think there is a significant level of support in the public for having a vaccine passport and for having a bit of certainty about when international travel will be available again.